Welcome back, everybody. IAmAMusicNerd here, back with another tier list video, and today I'm going to be talking about the band Arcade Fire, one of the most successful indie rock bands of the 21st century, certainly of my generation. They have a huge cult following, and one of the bands from that era of The Strokes and Franz Ferdinand and White Stripes that really had a huge impact on rock music, how rock music would be covered. And it's kind of insane to see how they rose to becoming an underground band from Montreal to now headlining stadiums and arenas. It's still insane to think about. But going to be ranking their best to worst albums in their discography in a tier list. But as always, if you enjoy the content on this channel, if you enjoyed this video, show your support. Hit the like button down below, hit the subscribe button down below. Arcade Fire's first album, Funeral, which came out in 2004. Now at the time, wasn't really a big fan of Arcade Fire. Wasn't really too much aware of them. It's considered one of the greatest debut albums of all time. I was thinking, is it worth the hype? Is it really that good? And yeah, it's really that good. Now, Arcade Fire, what kind of made them unique in this era? They're amidst this whole post-punk revival. The White Stripes and the Strokes were becoming very popular. They had kind of a stripped down sound and guitar, bass and drums, black keys as well. Everything was very much simplified. Arcade Fire was the complete opposite of that. They were having bombastic production, utilizing many instruments. They had a 6-piece band. Their concerts were very lavish, very over the top. Their lyrics were very earnest and melodramatic, and their songs were definitely sound like the end of the world is coming. And yeah, they have had, that's kind of some of their main criticism, that they take themselves too seriously, that they are very pretentious. But I think in this album, it definitely works here. Songs like Wake Up and Rebellion, Lies are some of my favorite Arcade Fire songs. Funeral, to me, is an album that is timeless. It doesn't sound like 2004. I mean, look what was out at the time. You had Kanye West, you had Eminem, you had Sierra My Goodies. Arcade Fire couldn't be anywhere different from what was going on the radio at that time. Even in rock, we had new metal was still there, and Foo Fighters. Arcade Fire was completely different from anything else that was coming out at the time. So I think that this album has definitely held up. Incredible production for an album that sounds so joyous, and it sounds like a party, to have lyrics that sound so bleak. It just goes to show you how good Arcade Fire was. I'm going to put Funeral in the S tier. Arguably their best album. Not my personal favorite. If you haven't checked out this album, check it out. It's an indie rock classic. Next album we'll be talking about, Neon Bible, which came out 3 years later. And by this time, Arcade Fire had gotten huge critical acclaim for Funeral. They were indie darlings, and now they were starting to buck into the mainstream, being talked about on Rolling Stone, playing on Saturday Night Live. And for a band this quirky and unique, it was crazy to see that this band was being accepted by legions of people. They really found a sound that just caught on with a ton of fans. And Neon Bible, they started to switch things up a little bit. Lyrics kind of dealing with religion and fate and nostalgia. They started tackling more electronic production, utilizing accordions and harps and organs. It definitely does sound like a neon church. A lot of people have criticized it for being, just joyless and being too serious. I think it's a solid album. Not as good as Funeral. I think there are some good songs here. No Cargo, Keep the Car Running, My Body is a Cage, Intervention. There's some solid tracks here that I would bump. The electronic production can get a little bit too samey for me at times. Using rock and roll organs, I know it's nothing new. The Doors did it way back in the 60s, but some of it hits, some of it doesn't. There isn't much variety in this album like there was in Funeral, but I still think it's an okay album. It gets I think it gets criticized way too much. I think it's fine. I'm going to put it in the B tier. Next album, The Suburbs, which came out in 2010, won the Grammy Award for Album of the Year. At the time, was seen as a big upset. I don't think a lot of people were expecting Arcade Fire to beat, Eminem and Lady Gaga for Album of the Year. But this was a very successful album. This was the first album to debut at #1. And in my opinion, my favorite Arcade Fire album. I think this is their best album. I think this is when Win Butler's lyrics really was at its peak. I think the dynamic between Win, Regine, I don't know if I'm saying her name right, and the band was just airtight. Was incredible. I think the variety here and the diversity of songs. Some are bombastic, but some are very slow and very mellow. Everything just that's great about Arcade Fire is packed into this album, and it's a bit of a concept album. Think of this as like a musical version of like a coming of age movie dealing with teenage trials and tribulations. They said that they want this album to sound like a mixture of Depeche Mode and Neil Young, and I don't know how they did it, but it really does sound like that. So a lot of these songs here are very endemic. Kind of reminds me of like classic Springsteen, classic Bob Dylan. We're trapped in this cage and we're gonna get out and we're gonna show the world and all that stuff. That type of attitude, which can be corny in times, and it's been done a lot of times in rock. But I don't know, for some reason here, it just works, man. And it's very authentic. It's not overly preachy. It's not overly cynical either. I think it just hits all the right moods. It hits all the right tones. So I gotta put The Suburbs. I'm also gonna put it in the S tier. I think it's an incredible album, and an album that I'm gonna be playing for the rest of days. So check out this album. So the next album I'm talking about is Reflector, which came out in 2013. Now, they've been taking 3-year breaks. Arcade Fire is a band that they don't put out shit just to put out shit. They take their time, and every album sounds different. And I think Reflector is probably the most different from what they had previously done in their discography. Kind of showed them loosening up a little bit. They were working with James Murphy of LCD Sound System, and you can definitely tell his influence on this album. After The Suburbs and success and winning the Grammy, Arcade Fire was tapped as like the next Radiohead, the next U2. I think they were the next U2 in terms of, alright, they made their Joshua's Tree, and now they're gonna make their Octung Baby. They're gonna switch it up a little bit. They're gonna make island music, do disco, 70s funk. Look, I think it's a little uneven. I think some experiments work here. I think some of them really don't work here. And that's what I'm going to call this album. It's a bit of an experiment. I think it's them kind of testing the waters, seeing how far outside the lines they can go. I think there are still some rock-based songs here, but for the most part, a lot of these songs are groovy. They want to make you dance. A lot of the lyrics are not as serious as they were in previous albums, something that they would take to the next level on their next album. The opening song, Reflector, with David Bowie, is an incredible song, one of my favorite Arcade Fire songs, and songs like Hey Orpheus and Here Comes the Nighttime, they're great songs. But then there's other songs that don't really quite work, like Flashbulb Eyes. I didn't really get what they were going for with that. Porno, I don't want Arcade Fire to make sexy music. It just doesn't really work for me. It's kind of like your 60-year-old librarian now all of a sudden trying to be sexy. It's just weird. It just came out of nowhere. And Supersymmetry, I still don't know what the hell that was about. It's like an 11-minute song and it just goes nowhere. And half of it's not even a song. So, like I said, some of it works here, some of it doesn't. I do admire them for going outside the box. But I think I'm going to put it... I'm going to put in the B section. More like B-. I think it's an okay album. And then their last album they've released thus far, Everything Now, came out in 2017. I think Arcade Fire was like, we're just gonna keep it light. We're gonna have some humor in our music. We're gonna kind of, their whole promotional thing was them doing fake ads and fake commercials for talking about how technology's ruining our lives. With Reflector, they're trying something different, trying to see if the dance thing worked for them. And for some of their fans, it does work for them. I think that type of Arcade Fire, that type of like disco flavored Arcade Fire, you know, it really worked for them. For me, not so much. I think that with this album, they strayed away too far from what I love about Arcade Fire, the anthemic songs, the bombastic production. Here, you know, they're doing reggae stuff, they're doing funky, groovy, like old school new wave stuff, and it doesn't really hit all the time. There's still some great songs here. Creature Content is an amazing song, kind of like a blister of a track, although some of the lyrics are kind of tame. That's the thing too. This album features some of Arcade Fire's worst lyrics. Very on the nose, very basic at times. You know, infinite content, we're infinitely content. Just like singing that chorus over and over, like, why? You know, and then they switch it up. They do the same thing with a country tinged song, and they say the same thing. We're infinite content, and it's just like, where is this going? It's like way, way, way too on the nose about like, oh, technology's ruining our lives, and you know, we gotta be together as one and all that stuff. I think that everything that the critics have said about Arcade Fire, they did it here in the worst ways. They were indulgent in the worst ways, and there's some songs here that I absolutely hate. Look, I love Regine's falsetto, but Electric Blue, that's a no-no. That is grating on my ears. That production does not help her voice at all. That whole spare, funky production, that's not what she's suited for. She's more suited for the bombastic, kind of like energetic production. That's what, you know, songs like Empty Room, like that's what she's made for. That's where she shines. Everything Now, my least favorite Arcade Fire album. Not an album that I really go back to except for select tracks. I'm gonna put in the C tier, and that is it. That is my tier list of Arcade Fire's discography. Tell me what you think in the comment section below. What do you think about this tier list? What is your favorite Arcade Fire albums and songs? YouTube recommends these two other videos to check out after this one. Check out more tier lists that I've done of other groups and bands like Tribe Called Quest, Jay-Z, The Police. It's all there. Check it out. Until next time, peace.